Police officer abused his power to kick a rich black woman from her seat, leading to his bitter end. Attendants notified the authorities over what they claimed was a disturbance caused by the woman. As tensions escalated, the officers proceeded to arrest her, unaware of the surprising twist that would soon follow. The video captures the raw emotions of the passengers, some of whom voiced their concerns and disapproval over the handling of the incident. Before diving into the dramatic developments of the story, let me know where you are watching from by typing in the comments section. Remember to like, subscribe to the channel, and share the video for more people to see. Now focus and listen to our story. On this particular day, after wrapping up an important meeting, Dr. Williams arrived at the airport feeling exhausted but confident. As she walked through the bustling terminal, she noticed the usual pre-flight rush. Passengers hurrying to their gates, last-minute boarding calls echoing, and the hum of airport staff working diligently in the background. Amidst this busy environment, Dr. Williams moved with poise and determination. Though her presence may have drawn curious glances, she was accustomed to the attention. She had earned her success and carried herself with grace, unbothered by the eyes that followed her. When she approached her gate, she was stopped by an airline employee who informed her that her first-class seat wasn't available. Puzzled, Dr. Williams responded, "What do you mean? My seat is confirmed. It's printed right on my ticket." The employee hesitated, casting a nervous glance over her shoulder before apologetically explaining that there had been a mix-up and that she would need to sit elsewhere. Dr. Williams, having never encountered any issues with her reservations before, was initially surprised but maintained her composure. Still confused, she asked to speak with a supervisor. Captain Michael Turner, a tall white man with neatly combed gray hair, soon arrived at the scene. His crisp uniform and professional appearance contrasted sharply with his dismissive attitude toward Dr. Williams. Without much of an introduction, Turner barely acknowledged her, stating coldly, "You're in my first-class seat. You need to move." Dr. Williams, now more perplexed than ever, held up her boarding pass and insisted, "This is my reserved seat, and I paid for it." Captain Turner, not even glancing at the ticket for confirmation, shook his head dismissively, saying, "No, you're mistaken. That seat's taken." His tone was sharp, and there was a clear sense of impatience in his words. Feeling a rising sense of injustice but trying to remain calm, Dr. Williams refused to budge. She had paid for her seat, and she wasn't going to let anyone dismiss her rights based on nothing more than a misunderstanding, or perhaps something more insidious. She knew something wasn't right, but her confidence and professionalism helped her hold her ground as the situation began to escalate. The tension in the air became palpable as Captain Michael Turner stood firm in his position, refusing to acknowledge Dr. Jessica Williams' ticket. As Dr. Williams held up her boarding pass, clearly demonstrating her entitlement to the seat, Turner's dismissive attitude only grew. He glanced at the ticket for a brief moment, barely taking in the details, then waved it off as if it were inconsequential. "No, you're mistaken," he repeated, his tone growing more condescending. "That seat's already taken, and you need to move, now." Dr. Williams, taken aback by his arrogance, could feel her patience starting to slip, but she maintained her calm exterior. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about something far deeper: respect, dignity, and the right to be treated fairly. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. She'd traveled countless times, always with first-class privileges, and never had she been treated this way. "This is my reserved seat," she responded firmly, refusing to be intimidated by his disregard. "I have the right to sit here, and I'm not moving until you sort this out properly." Captain Turner's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by a woman, and even more so by someone of Dr. Williams' stature. His professional demeanor began to crack, revealing his true frustration. "I don't care who you are or what you think," he snapped, his voice rising slightly. "This is my plane, and you will leave this seat now, or I'll have you escorted off the plane." The words stung, and in that moment Dr. Williams felt the weight of something far more insidious than just an argument over seating. Her mind flashed to the subtle and overt forms of discrimination she had faced throughout her life, unseen but always present. In that moment, it was clear. This wasn't just about a seat. This was about her place in the world, her worth being questioned in front of everyone. It wasn't lost on her that the captain hadn't even taken her seriously, despite the fact that her boarding pass clearly indicated she was in the right. His behavior reeked of entitlement and disdain, rooted in something much deeper than a simple misunderstanding. As the confrontation heated up, a wave of murmurs rippled through the nearby passengers, who were now beginning to take notice. Some shot disapproving glances at Captain Turner, while others whispered among themselves, their eyes flicking nervously between Dr. Williams and the increasingly hostile captain. The growing sense of public scrutiny seemed to irritate Turner even more. He straightened his posture and, with a sharp gesture, signaled to two airport security officers who had been quietly observing the scene from a distance. The security officers approached with purposeful steps, their eyes scanning the situation as they assessed the escalating tension. One, a woman, spoke to Dr. Williams in a professional tone. "Ma'am, you need to leave the plane," she instructed, her voice tight with an undercurrent of unease. Dr. Williams felt a jolt of disbelief surge through her. This was no longer a simple seating issue. The officers were now involved, and she was being treated as if she were the one who had caused the disruption, when, in fact, she had done nothing wrong. "Are you serious?" Dr. Williams asked, her voice steady but carrying an edge of frustration. "I'm being removed from my seat that I paid for, and you're asking me to leave?" The emotional weight of the situation hit her like a wave. She felt humiliated, not just by the captain's dismissive behavior, but by the fact that the security officers were now involved, seemingly siding with the captain without question. Her heart raced, and a knot formed in her stomach. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a spectacle, treated as an outsider, as someone who didn't belong, despite her achievements, her status, and her rights. As she slowly gathered her belongings, preparing to leave the plane under duress, the gravity of the moment began to sink in. She had tried to remain calm, to uphold her dignity, but it felt increasingly difficult. The humiliation was not just about the seat, it was about her very presence, about the fact that she was being treated this way because of her race. In a fleeting moment, Dr. Williams reflected on the countless times in her life when she had been made to feel less than, simply because of her skin color. She had worked tirelessly to overcome those barriers, to achieve everything she had, but in that moment, all her accomplishments seemed irrelevant. The way she was being treated was a stark reminder that, to some, she would always be defined by her race. As Dr. Williams walked towards the plane's exit, she realized this moment was much bigger than herself. It wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of the racial dynamics that had shaped her life, the systemic biases that still ran deep in society. Though the pain of the experience was still fresh, she couldn't help but think about the many others who had faced similar treatment, those without the privilege of wealth, status, or influence to fight back. Her resolve began to harden. She wouldn't let this go. This wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about confronting a system that sought to diminish people like her, to make them feel invisible. And she wasn't about to stay silent. As Dr. Jessica Williams sat in the quiet of her hotel room, the weight of the day pressing down on her, her phone vibrated on the table beside her. She glanced at the screen to see a familiar name, her father's executive assistant, Clara. Jessica hesitated for a moment before answering, unsure of how to explain the chaos that had unfolded earlier. "Dr. Williams?" Clara's composed voice filled the line, tinged with a note of concern. "Your father is asking for you. He's been briefed about what happened and wants to speak with you directly." Jessica sighed deeply, preparing herself for the conversation. While she shared a close bond with her father, Charles Williams, she knew how seriously he took situations like this. A self-made billionaire and one of the most influential black businessmen in the country, Charles Williams was not just a proud father, but also a staunch advocate for justice and equality. Moments later, her phone rang again. This time, it was her father himself. She answered quickly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions she still felt. "Jessica?" Charles's deep, measured voice came through. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I just heard what happened. Are you all right?" Jessica hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I'm okay, Dad, just shaken. It was humiliating, and it's hard not to feel—" She paused, her voice catching slightly. Like this happened because of who I am. Not what I've achieved, but what I look like. There was a pause on the other end, and Jessica could almost hear the gears turning in her father's mind. Charles Williams was not a man prone to impulsive reactions. He had built his empire on a foundation of calculated decisions and unwavering determination. But she also knew how fiercely protective he was of his family. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, his tone calm but commanding. Jessica recounted the incident, from the moment she was stopped at the boarding gate to the humiliating confrontation with Captain Turner and the security officers. She described the dismissive attitude, the hostile tone, and the public humiliation she endured as passengers watched in silence. When she finished, there was another pause. Her father's voice, when he finally spoke, was steady but carried a weight of restrained anger. "This isn't just about you, Jessica," he said. "What happened to you is a reflection of something much bigger, a system that allows people like that captain to act with impunity. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, and it won't be the last unless we make it clear that this behavior has consequences." Jessica nodded, though he couldn't see her. "I know, Dad, but it's hard to not take it personally. It's hard to feel like all my work, all my achievements, don't matter when I'm still treated like I don't belong. Yeah, I wouldn't be too happy either, but I survived you going into court and I managed to save the government." Charles's voice softened. "You belong, Jessica. Don't ever doubt that. And you've achieved more than most people could dream of. That's exactly why this can't be ignored. You've worked too hard to let anyone diminish you like that." "If you'd say so," she said. There was a resolve in his voice now, a quiet determination that Jessica recognized all too well. "I'll handle this," Charles continued. "I'll make sure this incident is addressed at the highest levels, not just for you, but for everyone who's been treated this way and couldn't fight back. This isn't just about one flight, one captain, or one airline. This is about holding people accountable for their actions and demanding change." Jessica felt a surge of gratitude and relief. Her father's unwavering support was exactly what she needed at that moment. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly. "I didn't know how to move forward with this, but hearing you say that, knowing you're behind me, it means everything." Charles's voice carried a quiet strength as he replied, "You're my daughter, Jessica. I've always got your back. Now, let's make sure this doesn't happen again to you or anyone else." As the call ended, Jessica felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just her fight anymore. With her father's support and influence, she knew they had the power to turn this painful experience into a catalyst for change. The humiliation she endured might have been a defining moment, but it wouldn't define her. Together, she and her father would ensure that this incident became a turning point in a much larger battle for justice and equality. In a sleek conference room at the headquarters of Stellar Air, the airline's PR team huddled around a large screen displaying an endless stream of tweets, news alerts, and video clips. The incident on Flight 275 had become a public relations nightmare. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack was trending globally, and every major news outlet had picked up the story. "This is spiraling out of control," said Marissa Young, the airline's PR director, her voice strained as she paced the room. "We need a response, and we need it now." Her team exchanged uneasy glances. The viral video of Dr. Jessica Williams being removed from her first-class seat by Captain Turner was damning. It showed her calmly presenting her ticket while Turner dismissed her with a wave of his hand, his body language radiating disdain. The footage of security officers escorting her off the plane had been replayed millions of times, accompanied by commentary highlighting the racial undertones of the interaction. "We need to acknowledge the incident and promise a full investigation," one team member suggested hesitantly. "And look like we're admitting guilt before we've even spoken to Turner or reviewed the footage?" Marissa shot back. "No, we need to tread carefully. This isn't just about one flight, it's about the entire reputation of Stellar Air." Meanwhile, in a small office at the airport, Captain Jack Turner sat alone, staring at his phone. Messages flooded in from colleagues and friends, many of whom had seen the video. He hadn't fully grasped the magnitude of the situation until someone forwarded him an article with the headline, "Prominent Entrepreneur and Civil Rights Advocate Humiliated on Stellar Air Flight." But more. Dr. Jessica Williams. The name alone sent a chill down his spine. He had heard of her, who hadn't? A trailblazing entrepreneur, philanthropist, and advocate for racial justice, Jessica was widely admired and respected. And she was the daughter of Charles Williams, one of the most powerful black businessmen in the country. Turner leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had no idea who she was during the confrontation, but now, the weight of his actions was sinking in. His dismissal of her was not just seen as an individual act, but a representation of systemic bias, and the world was watching. On platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, the story exploded. Passengers who had been on the flight shared their accounts, many corroborating Jessica's version of events. Some shared their own experiences of feeling marginalized while flying. Influencers, activists, and celebrities amplified the story, adding their voices to the growing outrage. The hashtags Flying While Black, Justice for Jessica, and Boycott Stellar Air dominated the digital space. A clip of Jessica's calm yet firm response to Turner had gone viral, with captions like, "Grace under pressure," and "A masterclass in dignity." "I can't believe this happened to someone like her," one user posted. "If they'll treat a billionaire this way, imagine how they treat the rest of us." Jessica herself remained silent on social media, but her father, Charles Williams, was anything but quiet. Back in his office, Charles Williams was on the phone, his tone calm yet authoritative. "This isn't just about my daughter," he told one of his contacts, a prominent civil rights attorney. "This is about a culture of impunity that needs to end." Charles's network was vast and influential, spanning business, media, and politics. He reached out to journalists, ensuring the story stayed in the headlines. He connected with advocacy groups, framing the incident as part of a larger fight against systemic racism in the airline industry. He also used his resources to push for accountability. Within hours, his legal team had filed a formal complaint with Stellar Air, demanding a public apology, a full investigation, and a commitment to diversity and sensitivity training for all employees. Privately, Charles reached out to Jessica. "I've spoken to some people," he told her. "This isn't going to be swept under the rug. You've been silent so far, and I respect that. But when you're ready to speak, the world will listen." Jessica appreciated her father's efforts but remained conflicted. She knew her voice carried weight, but she wanted to ensure that whatever she said would lead to meaningful change, not just a temporary outcry. As the public backlash grew, Stellar Air's stock price began to dip. Customers flooded the airline's social media pages with demands for accountability, many threatening to take their business elsewhere. Back in the conference room, Marissa Young faced mounting pressure to release a statement. "If we don't say something now, we risk losing control of the narrative entirely," she told her team. Hours later, Stellar Air issued a carefully worded statement. "We are aware of the deeply concerning incident involving Dr. Jessica Williams and are conducting a thorough investigation. Stellar Air is committed to providing an inclusive and respectful experience for all our passengers, and we do not tolerate discrimination of any kind." But the statement did little to quell the outrage. Critics labeled it as vague and insufficient, accusing the airline of trying to deflect rather than take responsibility. The incident had become a cultural flashpoint, igniting conversations about systemic racism in industries far beyond aviation. Advocacy groups organized protests, and calls for boycotts grew louder. For Jessica and her father, the backlash was a painful reminder of how far society still had to go. But it was also an opportunity, a chance to push for lasting change. As Jessica prepared to break her silence, she knew her words would carry the weight of not just her experience, but the collective voices of countless others who had endured similar indignities. The decision to pursue legal action was not made lightly. Seated across from her father in their family's sprawling home office, Dr. Jessica Williams took a deep breath as Charles Williams reviewed the final draft of their legal filing. "This isn't just about me," Jessica said, her voice steady but resolute. "This is about challenging a system that lets things like this happen over and over again." Charles nodded, his expression firm. "We'll make them answer for this. Not just Turner, but the entire system that enables this behavior. The lawsuit, filed against both Stellar Air and Captain Jack Turner, alleged racial discrimination and violation of Jessica's rights as a paying passenger. It sought damages for emotional distress and a public commitment from the airline to implement systemic changes, including mandatory diversity training for employees and a review of their internal policies. The courtroom was packed on the day Jessica Williams testified. Reporters filled the gallery, their pens poised to capture every word. Outside, supporters gathered with signs reading "Justice for Jessica" and "End Airline Racism." Dressed in a tailored navy suit, Jessica appeared composed as she took the stand. Her legal team had advised her to keep her testimony factual, but her emotions inevitably seeped through. "On that day," Jessica began, "I presented my first-class ticket, the same as any other passenger, but I was told my seat wasn't available. When I asked for clarification, I was met with hostility and eventually removed from the plane. I couldn't help but wonder, would I have been treated this way if I looked different?" Her voice wavered slightly as she recounted the moment Captain Turner dismissed her, refusing to even look at her ticket. "I've worked hard for everything I have," she continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "I've built a business, contributed to my community, and believed in fairness and equality. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All they saw was the color of my skin." The courtroom was silent as Jessica described the humiliation of being escorted off the plane, the stares of other passengers burning into her back. "This isn't just about me," she concluded, her voice gaining strength. "It's about the countless others who don't have the resources to fight back. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again." After the day's proceedings, Jessica and her father emerged from the courthouse to a throng of reporters and cameras. Charles stood at her side as Jessica stepped up to the microphone, her poise unshaken despite the media frenzy. "This case is about accountability," she declared. "It's about ensuring that no one, regardless of their background, is treated as though they are less than anyone else. What happened to me was wrong, but it's not an isolated incident. It's part of a larger problem that needs to be addressed." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "To those who have faced similar treatment, know this: your voice matters, your dignity matters, and together, we can demand better." The reporters shouted questions, but Jessica kept her statement focused on the larger issue. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about change. For me, for everyone who has ever felt invisible or dismissed, and for those who come after us." The press conference was broadcast live, and Jessica's words quickly became a rallying cry on social media. Messages of support poured in, with people sharing their own experiences of discrimination and applauding her courage. "This is what leadership looks like," one user posted alongside a clip of her speech. Organizations dedicated to racial justice and consumer rights voiced their support, offering resources and amplifying her message. Advocacy groups called for widespread reforms in the airline industry, including transparency in how passengers are treated and held accountable. Meanwhile, Stellar Air faced mounting pressure. Employees leaked internal memos showing that similar complaints had been brushed aside in the past. Public opinion was firmly on Jessica's side, and boycotts against the airline intensified. Through it all, Jessica remained a symbol of resilience. Her decision to fight back wasn't just about seeking justice for herself, but about paving the way for a more equitable future. As she prepared for the next phase of the trial, Jessica knew the fight was far from over, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Captain Jack Turner's fall from grace was swift and unrelenting. The announcement of his suspension came just days after the lawsuit was filed, and it sent shockwaves through the airline industry. Stellar Air, under mounting public and legal pressure, had little choice but to act decisively. Turner received the news in a terse email from the airline's executive office. "Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the investigation." The words stung, but the reality didn't fully sink in until he saw his name splashed across every major news outlet. At first, Turner tried to rationalize the situation. "This is a misunderstanding," he told his wife over dinner one evening. "I was doing my job." But as the media coverage intensified, it became harder to dismiss the gravity of his actions. News programs replayed clips of passengers recounting the incident and pundits dissecting his behavior. Social media was even less forgiving, with hashtags like Fire Captain Turner and Accountability Now trending for days. Turner's colleagues, once supportive, distanced themselves. A few sent brief messages of solidarity, but most stayed silent, unwilling to risk their own careers. His union offered legal support, but even their assurances felt hollow. As the investigation unfolded, more troubling details emerged. Former employees came forward, claiming Turner had a history of treating certain passengers with disdain, though nothing this overt had been documented before. Stellar Air's internal review revealed inconsistencies in Turner's handling of passenger disputes, painting a picture of a captain who frequently let his personal biases influence professional decisions. These findings all but sealed his fate. Turner's desperation grew. Late one night, he scrolled through his phone, reading scathing comments online. One particularly biting remark struck a nerve. "You can't hide behind your uniform anymore, Turner. The world sees you for who you really are." He tried to reach out to the airline, pleading his case with HR representatives and supervisors, but their responses were cold and formulaic. The investigation would take its course, they told him. Alone in his dimly lit home office, Turner stared at his neatly pressed uniform hanging in the closet. It had once symbolized his authority and pride, but now it felt like a relic of a life slipping through his fingers. The pressure became unbearable. Turner's health began to deteriorate, sleepless nights turned into anxiety attacks, and his once confident demeanor was replaced with a palpable sense of regret and fear. Yet, even in his darkest moments, Turner struggled to confront the root of the issue. To him, the incident was a mistake, a lapse in judgment. What he failed to acknowledge was the systemic nature of his actions, and the damage they inflicted not just on Dr. Jessica Williams, but on everyone who witnessed the event. As the public and legal scrutiny continued, Turner's career in aviation was effectively over. For the first time in decades, he was grounded, not by choice, but by the consequences of his actions. As the legal dust began to settle, Jessica Williams and her father, Charles, sat in the quiet of their family home. The past months had been a whirlwind of courtroom battles, media appearances, and emotional conversations. Now, they finally had a moment to reflect. "I knew this fight wasn't just about me," Jessica said, gazing out the window. "It's about making sure no one else has to endure what I did." Her father nodded, pride and determination evident in his expression. The courtroom proceedings concluded with a landmark resolution. The airline, faced with overwhelming public and legal pressure, agreed to a settlement that included significant monetary compensation to Jessica and a commitment to systemic changes within their company. They pledged to revamp their diversity training, hire a chief diversity officer, and establish clear accountability measures for discriminatory behavior. Captain Jack Turner, however, faced the harshest repercussions. The investigation revealed not only his actions during the incident, but also a pattern of biased decision-making. The airline terminated his employment, and the Federal Aviation Administration revoked his pilot's license, effectively ending his career in aviation. For Jessica, the legal victory was bittersweet. "Justice isn't just about one case," she said during a press conference. "It's about dismantling the systems that allow this to happen in the first place." The story resonated far beyond the courtroom. Jessica's poise and resilience throughout the ordeal made her a beacon of hope for many. Social media campaigns praised her bravery, and communities rallied around her cause. Inspired by the overwhelming support, Jessica and Charles launched the Williams Foundation for Equity and Justice, an organization dedicated to addressing systemic racism in corporate and public institutions. The foundation aimed to provide legal assistance, advocacy, and education to marginalized communities. Jessica's voice became a powerful one in the fight for equality. She spoke at conferences, universities, and rallies, sharing her story and advocating for change. "This isn't about retribution," she often said. "It's about creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." Despite the personal and legal victories, Jessica knew the fight was far from over. Incidents of discrimination continued to surface across industries, each a reminder of how deeply rooted systemic racism remained. One night, as she prepared for a keynote speech, Jessica revisited a message she'd received from a young woman. "Your story gave me the courage to stand up for myself. Thank you for being a voice for people like me." It was messages like these that fueled Jessica's resolve. "This isn't just my fight," she told her father. "It's our collective responsibility." The case became a watershed moment in the fight against systemic racism, sparking widespread conversations about privilege, accountability, and change. Policies were scrutinized, institutions reevaluated their practices, and more individuals found the courage to speak out against injustice. Jessica's journey from humiliation and pain to strength and advocacy reminded the world that progress requires persistence. As she concluded her keynote speech at a global equality summit, she left the audience with a powerful message. "We have made strides, but the work is far from done. Racism isn't just a moment, it's a system, and systems don't change overnight. But together, with courage and compassion, we can build a world where justice isn't an aspiration, but a reality. Let's keep fighting, for ourselves and for those who come after us." The audience rose to their feet in applause, a testament to the impact of her words. Jessica smiled, knowing the road ahead would be long, but worth every step. Jessica Williams' journey from victim to advocate is a powerful reminder of resilience and the importance of standing against injustice. What began as an act of humiliation and discrimination transformed into a movement for accountability and systemic change. Through her courage, Jessica not only sought justice for herself, but also became a voice for countless others who face similar battles every day. Her story underscores the reality that systemic racism persists in many forms, and it's up to each of us to challenge it. This isn't just about one person or one incident. It's about building a society rooted in fairness, dignity, and respect for all. Let Jessica's story inspire action. Reflect on the systems around you, educate yourself, and use your voice to advocate for justice. Together, we can create a future where equality isn't an ideal, but a lived reality. The fight continues. Let's be part of the solution.